and which is still, there's a long way to go. As the minister just said, internal trade is one part of, there are many other elements. And another very critical area, which is the theme of this forum, is really inclusive growth. And I think if we, together with the international community's help, certainly China has shown a great interest in helping Africa, but also China can provide a market for a lot of Africa's products. Now, I hope eventually not just resources, and there will be other goods.
But made goods coming from Africa into China.
Yeah. I think with that kind of opportunity, I think Africa has a great potential to realize the growth projection.
Hendrik, you operate on the African continent. What are the challenges, well, what are the opportunities? Sorry, Minister, I keep going back to the challenges. What are the opportunities that you see on a daily basis?
I mean, in fact, in the entire emerging world, the opportunity, Bronwyn, is that there are a large number of people, billions in fact, have been re-included in the global economy over the last 20, 25 years, and they now know it. They're electronically empowered, digitally empowered, and they're willing and wanting to participate. Of course, there are many excluded, which we need to get in. So it's this change, which is probably one of the most momentous changes we could live through. We lived through, all of us in the room, most of us lived through the change of China when Deng Xiaoping started. We lived through what Brazil achieved, and there were people who were cynical, and we're exactly at that early stage. Call it the early 80s in China now on the African continent with similar challenges. So from a business point of view, what really interests us is also the fact that Africa is trying to integrate itself, or the world is trying to integrate Africa, particularly via China. So it's not just Africa local market, it is actually Africa in the world. And that's maybe something I'd like to come back to later.
Julian, Nigeria, $510 billion in terms of the rebasing of the GDP status, making it the biggest economy on the African continent. We have heard repeatedly throughout the forum, many saying that size doesn't matter in this instance. We need to work together, especially South Africa and Nigeria. Are you unlocking the opportunity that Nigeria presents from a sheer size perspective?
We're investing heavily in Nigeria. We're investing heavily in other African countries. I think there is undoubtedly huge progress that's been made, but really to unlock that potential, there's a lot more that needs to be done. We often focus on infrastructure, and we focus on, railways and roads. The Chinese premier was talking about it. But actually, from my point of view, there is the financial services that needs to be done. The cross-border payments need to be speeded up. And I think what's happened in East Africa is leading the way, as we just heard earlier, that the payment systems, the countries are working together. So I think there are real opportunities in each individual country, but the real power will come in when we can get Africa working really closely together.
Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, if we can go back to Nigeria. In Addis Ababa at the World Economic Forum, we were sitting on a similar stage, and I remember there discussing the issue of the free movement of people and capital and goods, specifically visa requirements. Minister Gordhan has said, let's not talk about visa requirements and the dropping of visa requirements, but rather let's talk about boosting intra-Africa trade, which sits at 12%. It isn't growing from that level. I know previously you've spoken about the informal trade sector that we need to take into account here. But surely there's some short-term wins we can do, Minister, so that when we are at the World Economic Forum in Africa, the 25th, which will be in South Africa next year, we're not talking about the same things when it comes to the free movement of capital, goods, and people.
Well, yes, I think we won't be talking about the same things, because you just heard Minister Claver of Rwanda, Gatete, say that considerable progress has been made.
Minister, if you can speak to this side of...
Oh, okay, sorry. He mentioned that, they now have a card and they can use it to, travel from one country to the other. Within the West African region, we don't need visas to move around. And I think even in Nigeria here, we've taken the decision that business people who genuinely want to invest come in can get visas at the borders, but among ourselves, those coming from other communities, we're going to try to implement that to make it easier. So yes, I believe that we should increasingly, by next year, see policies that prevent us from interacting with each other go away. Those that can be done by a stroke of a pen. But then we have to also work on those things that are much more difficult in the medium and long term, which have to do with the hard infrastructure. And I have some good news there. The West African presidents. Can you hear me?
If you can take this, there we go. If you can take that mic.
The West African presidents have decided in ECOWAS that they're going to build a coastal highway to connect all the countries. And they've signed Abidjan, Lagos to Abidjan, and eventually to go all the way to Dakar. You know, so we're starting with that. We're very optimistic about that. That's a concrete expression of the need. Once we have that and you can travel all the way without being stopped, that's going to boost trade so much and bring the informal within the formal sector.
Minister Gordhan, what can South Africa do to contribute to fast-tracking this process, the free movement, goods, people, and capital?
We've gone a long way in that direction already. If you take the question of movement of capital, South African firms today have a presence in most African countries. The financial sector, telecommunications, retail, mining services, and year after year we've adjusted our exchange controls and other provisions in order to ensure that firstly South African firms can take capital out, and in fact preferential treatment is given to those South African firms that want to invest in Africa. So if you take it elsewhere in the world, there's a different set of rules, but we've encouraged investment in Africa, and it certainly has worked. If you come to South Africa today, I would imagine that 3/4 of the African continent will have people in South Africa in one form or another. So both formally and informally, both in the professions and outside of the professions, South Africa has any number of people outside of the South African population that are there. On the movement of goods, state-owned entities like Transnet have certainly provided access right up to the DRC and other parts of Central and Eastern West Africa, or the western part of Central Africa. But a lot more needs to be done. So I think there's a consciousness about that. There's excellent work going on in the infrastructure program that we've worked out both in the AU and now with WEF as well. And we're getting to a point where a pipeline of projects like the one that my colleague and sister is talking about are there. We need to turn them into bankable projects. The financial sector is also coming to the party, so that's excellent as well. As far as the payment systems are concerned, I think we have a fairly good one in Southern Africa. And what we need now is the connectivity. If you look at stock exchanges, there's two people sitting in the front row here representing Joburg Stock Exchange and the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So they're working together. If we look at deepening capital markets across the African continent, of course South Africa has the deepest of those markets, but a lot of good work is happening in terms of sharing expertise and enabling some of those things to actually happen. Of course, as some of those more sophisticated developments take place, we've got to beware that we become more connected to Western economies or the developed economies. It means any contagion, both financial and other, emerging from those economies can then impact on economies that weren't impacted in 2008, 2009 as well. So whilst there's the optimism, I think we need to also be aware of the risks and work out how collectively and individually we manage those risks as well.
And of course, Minister Gatete, you need to weigh in here because you are further than anybody else from an East African community perspective, and that is being driven largely by Rwanda's input.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the point that the Minister has just mentioned, which is very, very crucial. Two things. One is that if you have to raise money, more significantly, we cannot just rely on the banking system the way we are doing in most of the African countries. We need to develop our capital markets. We need to link the capital markets so there is cross-border trade and raise resources from outside. Number two, there has been a problem which we are discovering now as we implement the East African big projects, infrastructure projects, is that we've been relying on